The sun had barely risen over the dusty streets of Khartoum when Ahmed woke with a heavy feeling in his chest. He was a young man, only 23, but his heart carried a courage older than his years. In his small neighborhood, being a Christian was dangerous, and whispers of threats had reached his ears for months. Still, he never imagined the danger would come so close, so fast. As he stepped outside, the smell of smoke lingered faintly in the air, though the city was calm, almost deceptively so. Ahmed's morning had started like any other. He had prayed quietly in his small, dimly lit room, reading passages from his worn Bible. The words of hope, of love, and of protection filled him with warmth, yet a shadow of fear lingered. His family had begged him to be careful, to stay invisible, but Ahmed believed in something bigger than fear. He believed that no matter what men could do, God's power was stronger, and that one day, his miracles would shine through even in the darkest places. By mid-morning, the streets were alive with chatter, carts rattling over cracked roads, and children running between stalls. Ahmed walked slowly, trying to keep his presence unnoticed. But in a city where suspicion lingered like a thick fog, it was impossible to hide entirely. A group of men had been watching him for days, waiting for a moment when they could strike. As Ahmed passed a narrow alley, he felt their eyes on him, cold and sharp. He quickened his pace, heart pounding, but before he could reach safety, they surrounded him. The men's faces were cruel, their voices harsh as they accused Ahmed of crimes he did not commit, crimes born of fear and hatred rather than truth. They dragged him toward a makeshift pyre in the center of a deserted square, torches flickering in their hands. Ahmed's heart thumped wildly, but he did not scream. Instead, he whispered a prayer, calling on Jesus for courage, for protection, for a miracle. People gathered at a distance, some afraid, some too powerless to intervene, their eyes wide with horror as the flames were prepared. As the fire was lit, a wave of intense heat washed over Ahmed. Flames danced around him, crackling and hissing, threatening to consume everything. Pain surged, but something inside him remained calm, almost untouched. He closed his eyes and focused on the presence he felt beside him, a warmth stronger than any fire. It was as if someone invisible held him, shielding him from the blaze, whispering that he was not alone, that death could not claim him. The men stepped back, confused, as the fire refused to burn Ahmed the way it should have. Their torches flickered and dimmed, smoke curling around them as if mocking their intentions. Panic spread among them, some dropped their torches, some shouted at one another in fear. Ahmed opened his eyes, feeling the warmth of something holy wrapping around him, protecting him. His heart raced, but not with fear, with wonder and a strange, growing joy. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The fire that should have consumed him turned into a circle of flickering light that surrounded him harmlessly. Flames licked the edges of his clothes but left no burn, no mark, no pain. The men screamed and fled, stumbling over themselves, leaving Ahmed standing alone, unharmed, his face shining with a mixture of relief, awe, and gratitude. For a long while, the square was silent except for the crackling of the dying pyre. Ahmed knelt down, tears streaming down his face, his heart full of a miracle so powerful that even the fear that had haunted him for months vanished completely. He had prayed for courage, but he had been given more than courage. He had been given life, a living testimony that faith could move mountains, even in a place where darkness seemed to rule. Even as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the streets, Ahmed knew that his life had changed forever. What the men intended for harm had become a witness to God's power. And in the hearts of those who had watched in fear and awe, a spark of hope had been ignited, a spark that would not easily be forgotten. The news of what had happened to Ahmed spread through the streets of Khartoum like wildfire. At first, people whispered quietly in corners, afraid of being seen talking about a Christian who had survived a fire that should have ended his life. But soon, the story could not be contained. Families told their children, shopkeepers spoke to one another, and even strangers passing in the streets lowered their voices to recount the miracle. Every retelling added awe and fear, a mix of wonder at what had happened and terror at the power that had protected him. Ahmed, still shaken but unharmed, returned to his small home, where his mother and younger sister waited. They had heard the commotion but could not believe what they had feared until they saw him with their own eyes. His clothes were scorched at the edges, but his skin bore no marks. His hair smelled faintly of smoke, but there was no burn. His eyes shone with a strange brightness, as though something within him had been touched by a power far greater than any human could understand. His mother ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "Ahmed, thank God, you're alive," she cried, embracing him tightly. I thought we had lost you." His sister clung to his arm, trembling, unable to speak. Ahmed held them both, feeling a deep, unexplainable calm. "I'm here," he whispered, "because he was with me. Jesus, he didn't let anything harm me." Word of the miracle reached even beyond their neighborhood. People who had long ignored the Christians in their city began to take notice. Some were curious, some skeptical, and others were genuinely frightened. The men who had tried to burn Ahmed alive were shaken. They had expected him to die quickly, to vanish in smoke and fire, yet he had walked out unharmed. Rumors spread that the fire itself had refused him, that some unseen force had protected him. Fear and superstition began to ripple through the streets, and whispers of revenge and judgment filled the minds of his attackers. Ahmed, however, did not let fear guide him. Though he knew the men might strike again, he could not hide. His heart told him he had survived for a reason, not just to live, but to be a witness to something far bigger than himself. He went quietly among the people, helping wherever he could, sharing food, giving a hand to those in need, and telling his story, not boastfully, but simply, clearly, and with honesty. Each word he spoke carried weight because it was true. And slowly, people began to see him differently, not as someone weak or foolish, but as someone touched by the impossible. But danger was never far away. The men who had tried to kill him were furious, their pride and hatred wounded. They whispered of catching him when no one was watching, of punishing him for embarrassing them in front of the city. Ahmed's life became a careful balance. He could not ignore the threats, yet he refused to live in fear. Every night he prayed deeply, asking for guidance, for courage, and for protection, not just for himself, but for all who were innocent and persecuted around him. In the days that followed, a small but powerful movement began to grow quietly. People who had once hidden their faith in shadows began to speak openly, encouraged by Ahmed's miraculous survival. Families who feared retaliation slowly gained courage. Even some of the men who had initially tried to harm him began to question their actions, haunted by the vision of the fire that had refused to touch him. It was as if the city itself was trembling, divided between fear of human wrath and awe of something divine. Ahmed often returned to the square where the fire had been set. He knelt there, not with anger, but with a heart full of gratitude. The blackened wood still smelled faintly of smoke, but it no longer frightened him. He remembered the moment when warmth and protection had wrapped around him, when he had felt something more real than life itself holding him safe. And as he prayed, he began to understand that miracles were not only about saving life, they were about awakening hope, courage, and faith in hearts that had almost given up. Even as the sun set each evening, painting the city in shades of gold and blood red, the story of Ahmed's survival spread further, reaching homes, markets, and even distant villages. People who had once believed they were powerless began to whisper prayers, seeing in Ahmed a living sign that faith could triumph over hatred, that love could survive even in the darkest fire, and that miracles were possible when hearts were pure and courage unyielding. The danger had not ended. The city still held men who would seek to harm him, and Ahmed knew that. But fear no longer ruled him. Every step he took was guided by a calm confidence, a quiet certainty that the force that had saved him once could protect him again. And in the hearts of those who watched, hope began to grow like a small flame, fragile, yes, but impossible to extinguish. Ahmed could no longer walk the streets of Khartoum without feeling the weight of both fear and expectation pressing on him. The city had changed in the days since the fire, though its dusty streets and cracked sidewalks looked the same. Whispers followed him wherever he went, some filled with awe, some with suspicion, and some with hatred. But Ahmed no longer ran from the stairs or hid in the shadows. He had seen a power stronger than any human cruelty, and it had given him courage he never knew he possessed. Each morning, Ahmed rose before the sun, kneeling beside his bed as he whispered long prayers of gratitude and guidance. The memory of the flames, the fire that should have devoured him but had instead surrounded him with a protective warmth, never left his mind. It had been more than survival, it had been a message, a sign that faith was stronger than fear, that life was protected when it was meant to serve a purpose greater than one's own. He felt that purpose now, deep in his heart, urging him forward, demanding that he act not just as a survivor but as a witness. Word of Ahmed's miraculous escape had reached distant parts of the city. Families who had once whispered about Christians with fear now spoke in hushed reverence of his courage. Young people, inspired by his story, gathered in secret to hear him speak about hope, faith, and the unseen power that had kept him safe. Some were skeptical, others frightened, but many were filled with awe that a young man could walk through flames untouched, and still choose mercy over anger. Despite the growing admiration, the shadow of danger loomed heavily over Ahmed. The men who had tried to burn him alive had not forgotten, and neither had their hatred. They met in quiet corners, plotting, whispering of revenge. Their anger had transformed into fear, a fear born from the memory of the fire that had refused to burn him. But fear can make people reckless, and their hatred was growing sharper by the day. Ahmed knew that he could be attacked again, perhaps in ways more cunning than before, but he refused to let fear dictate his steps. He moved quietly, but purposefully. He visited families who had lost hope, offered food to the hungry, helped rebuild homes damaged by storms, and spoke words of encouragement to those living under oppression. His presence became a light in dark corners, a quiet but undeniable testimony of faith in action. Slowly, people began to speak openly about the miracle, and some even began to pray, daring to hope that something greater than themselves was watching over them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of deep purple and gold, Ahmed felt a strange restlessness. Something was stirring in the city, a tension that he could not ignore. He walked to the square where the fire had been set, the place where he had faced death and felt the miraculous protection wrap around him. The blackened pyre still stood, silent and eerie, but this time it seemed to carry a warning, a reminder that danger never truly disappears, it only waits. As he knelt there, praying for guidance, he sensed movement. Shadows shifted along the edges of the square, figures watching from darkened alleys. Ahmed's heart beat faster, but fear did not take hold. He whispered another prayer, calling on the protection that had saved him once, asking for courage, wisdom, and strength to face whatever was coming. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint warmth that reminded him of that day, a reassurance that he was not alone. The following days were a mixture of awe and danger. Ahmed's story had inspired many, but it had also angered those who opposed him. Threats were whispered in the markets, scrawled on walls, and shouted in empty streets late at night. Yet, with every challenge, Ahmed's faith grew stronger. He knew that he had survived not to cower in fear, but to be a living example of hope and courage. The people who saw him began to understand that true strength does not come from power, weapons, or wealth. It comes from the heart, from the ability to trust in something greater than yourself, and to act with love even when surrounded by hate. One afternoon, a small group of villagers approached him, eyes wide with fear and wonder. They told him of a young girl trapped in a collapsing house, too frightened to escape, her cries echoing in the ruins. Without hesitation, Ahmed ran with them, feeling an inner fire of determination. When he arrived, the girl's terrified eyes met his, and he knelt beside her, whispering words of comfort and promise. The debris was heavy, the air thick with dust, but Ahmed pressed forward, trusting that the same protection that had saved him from flames could guide his hands now. With a strength that seemed impossible, he lifted fallen beams, cleared rubble, and guided the girl to safety. When she emerged, trembling but unharmed, the villagers gasped, some falling to their knees in awe. It was a small miracle, yet to those who watched, it was proof that the same unseen power that had saved Ahmed before was still at work, guiding him, using him as an instrument of hope. But danger still lingered. Ahmed knew that his survival and acts of courage were making him a target, and that those who sought to harm him would not stop. He moved cautiously, always alert, but never afraid to show compassion. And as the sun set each day, casting long shadows across the city, Ahmed's presence became a beacon, a living proof that miracles were real, that hope could flourish in the darkest places, and that even in a world filled with hatred, love and faith could not be extinguished. By the time night fell, Ahmed returned home, exhausted but unbroken. He knelt once more, giving thanks for life, for courage, and for the invisible hand that had guided him through the fire and kept him alive. Though the path ahead remained dangerous, he knew one thing with certainty: Miracles were not just for the moment. They were meant to change lives, to inspire hearts, and to ignite hope where despair had once ruled. The days that followed were some of the most intense Ahmed had ever faced. Word of his miraculous survival had spread far beyond the streets of Khartoum, reaching villages and towns on the outskirts of the city. Messages of hope came to him through whispers, letters slipped quietly into his hands, and people arriving at his door with stories of suffering, fear, and despair. They all had one thing in common. They had heard of the young man who had walked through fire untouched, and they believed that if he could survive, they could hold on to hope too. Ahmed moved carefully, knowing that the men who had tried to kill him before were still searching for him. They had grown more cunning, more patient, and more dangerous. But Ahmed was no longer the frightened young man who had prayed in a quiet room. He had seen miracles, and his heart had been transformed. Every step he took, every word he spoke, carried the quiet authority of someone who knew he was protected by something far greater than hatred or human violence. He began traveling to neighborhoods where fear was strongest, where people had stopped going to work, sending their children to school, or even leaving their homes. Ahmed would arrive quietly, sometimes at dawn, speaking in soft, calm words, yet each word carried a weight that could not be ignored. "Do not be afraid," he would say. "God is with you. You are not alone." In homes and alleys, in schools and markets, people began to lift their heads and believe again. And in those moments, Ahmed saw something even more powerful than a miracle of survival. He saw courage being born in hearts that had almost given up. But the threat of the men who hated him never left. They followed him, watched him, whispered in secret meetings about how to strike when no one was looking. One evening, as Ahmed returned from a small village where he had encouraged a group of families, he felt a presence behind him. Shadows stretched across the dusty streets, menacing and deliberate. He quickened his pace, heart steady but alert, and whispered a prayer. "Guide me, protect me, and give me wisdom," he said, the words flowing from deep inside him, a calm that felt stronger than any fear. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the moonlight, blocking his path. The man's eyes were cold, and his hands held a stick, ready to strike. Ahmed stopped, feeling neither panic nor hatred. Instead, he felt the same warmth and strength that had wrapped around him in the fire. He did not fight, he did not lash out. He simply looked into the man's eyes and spoke softly, yet with a firmness that made the man pause. "I do not want to harm you," he said. "But I will not run from the truth. What you seek in anger cannot harm me. Only love and faith can guide us." The man hesitated, confusion and fear warring in his eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, as if something unseen had whispered in his ear, the man slowly lowered the stick and stepped back. He did not flee, but he did not strike again. Ahmed continued on his way, his heart pounding with gratitude, yet also with the knowledge that the power protecting him was far greater than any human violence. In the weeks that followed, Ahmed's courage inspired more than just individual acts of hope. Small communities began to form, quietly, courageously, in the shadow of fear. Neighbors helped one another, families shared resources, and even some who had once hidden in shame or fear began to speak openly of faith. The city, which had felt like a place of constant danger, slowly began to shift. People began to understand that strength did not always come from weapons or force, but from courage, kindness, and the belief that miracles were possible. Ahmed himself continued to face dangers. There were nights when threats were whispered at his doorstep, when stones were thrown at windows, when he awoke to signs that the men were watching him closely. But each time, he prayed. Each time, he felt the same warmth, the same protection, the same presence that had saved him from fire. He began to understand that miracles were not only about surviving, they were about teaching others that fear could be conquered, that faith could flourish, and that love and courage could withstand even the darkest threats. One night, Ahmed returned to the square where the fire had almost taken his life. The pyre had long since been cleared, but the memory of it burned brightly in his mind. He knelt, not in fear, but in gratitude and purpose. The city around him was quiet, yet alive with the subtle changes his courage had inspired. Families were safer, hearts were stronger, and whispers of hope floated through the streets. He knew that the fire that had once threatened him had become a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light and faith could not be destroyed. As he prayed, a small group of children approached, their eyes wide with curiosity and awe. They had heard the story of the fire and the miracle, and they wanted to know if it was true. Ahmed smiled, kneeling to their level. "Yes," he said softly. "It is true. But more than that, it shows that God is with all of us. When we trust, when we love, when we do what is right, we can face anything, and miracles can happen in ways we never imagine." The children's faces lit up with wonder, and Ahmed realized something powerful. The miracle was not just his. It belonged to everyone who believed, who hoped, and who had the courage to keep moving forward even when the world was full of danger. And as the night settled over the city, Ahmed felt a deep peace, knowing that while danger would continue to exist, hope had taken root, and nothing, not fire, not hatred, could destroy it. Ahmed awoke before dawn, the city still wrapped in shadows and quiet, but his heart was restless. Something deep inside told him that the days of subtle threats and whispered warnings were coming to an end. The men who had tried to kill him before were growing bolder, and though they had failed once, their hatred had not faded, it had hardened. Ahmed knew that the moment of confrontation was near, but he did not tremble. The same presence that had protected him through fire, through threats, and through fear had never left him. By mid-morning, Khartoum felt tense, charged with an invisible energy that no one could name. The streets were busy, yet there was an underlying unease. People glanced nervously at one another, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Ahmed moved carefully but openly, visiting families who had begun to rely on his courage as a source of hope. Children ran to him in the markets, whispering excitedly of the fire story, while mothers held his hands, grateful that someone could inspire bravery in such fearful times. The men who sought to harm him had grown desperate. They had gathered once again, this time in a hidden courtyard, plotting their final attempt. Their words were sharp, their faces twisted with rage, and their hearts full of hate. "Tonight," one said, "we end this. That boy will burn. We will not allow his survival to shame us any longer." Others nodded, fearful but driven by loyalty to their cruel leader. They did not know that the same power that had protected Ahmed before would meet them again. As night fell, the city seemed to hold its breath. Ahmed returned to the square where the fire had once threatened to take his life. The ground was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. He knelt for a long time, praying not only for protection, but for the men who had tried to harm him. "Let them see the truth," he whispered. "Let them feel the love they have never known, and may their hearts be changed." He rose with a calm determination, sensing that the moment had come. The men arrived under the cover of darkness, moving silently at first, their faces hidden beneath scarves and shadows. They carried torches, sticks, and ropes, ready to strike. But when they saw Ahmed standing alone in the square, their confidence wavered. There was something in his eyes, something unshakable, something alive, that made them pause. They took a step forward, then another, but the air around him seemed to thrum with energy, an invisible barrier they could not cross. "Ahmed," one of them shouted, voice trembling with fear and anger, "you cannot escape this. The fire will have you this time." Ahmed smiled, a calm, radiant smile that seemed to light the square. "No fire, no hatred, no darkness can touch me without God allowing it," he said. "You have seen power you do not understand. I do not hate you, but I will not run from truth. Change your hearts before it is too late." The men hesitated. Then, as if an unseen force had risen to meet them, the torches flickered and dimmed. The ropes they carried seemed to slip from their hands as if weighted by an invisible hand. Flames licked the edges of the wood they had brought, but instead of roaring to life, they sputtered and died. Panic spread across their faces, and for the first time, fear truly overtook their hatred. They looked at Ahmed, and something in their hearts began to shift. One by one, the men dropped their weapons, stepping back in awe. Some fell to their knees, shaking, unable to comprehend what they had witnessed. Ahmed stepped forward slowly, his arms open, not in attack, but in mercy. "The power that protects life is greater than the power that destroys," he said. "You can choose hate, or you can choose love. You can live in fear, or you can trust in what is good. It is your choice." The square, once a place of terror, became a place of transformation. People who had watched from a distance came closer, whispering, crying, and praying. Families held each other, children pointed in wonder, and the city seemed to hum with the quiet energy of hope. The men, once full of rage, now stood trembling, their eyes open to the miracle they had tried to destroy. Ahmed stayed that night in the square, speaking to those who gathered, sharing his story not just of survival, but of faith, mercy, and courage. He told them that miracles were not magic, they were the visible proof of hope, love, and belief in something greater than ourselves. Families left with hearts lighter than they had carried for years, and even those who had sought to harm him began to reconsider the path of hate they had chosen. By dawn, the city was forever changed. The square no longer smelled of smoke, nor carried the fear it once did. It had become a symbol of hope, a place where the impossible had been made real. Ahmed walked home slowly, his heart full, knowing that the fire had not only spared his life, but had sparked a transformation in a city that had long been shadowed by fear. He knelt at home once more, giving thanks, not for his own survival alone, but for the lives that had been touched, the hearts awakened, and the hope that had spread like a quiet flame across the streets. From that day forward, Ahmed's story was not just about a young man who survived fire, it was about the power of faith, courage, and love to change even the darkest corners of the world. And in every heart that heard it, a spark of hope burned, impossible to extinguish. Summary: Ahmed, a young Christian in Khartoum, Sudan, faces a life-threatening attack when men try to burn him alive. Miraculously, he survives, untouched by the flames, through the protection of Jesus. His courage and faith inspire fear, awe, and hope across the city. Despite threats from those who sought to harm him, Ahmed continues to help others, encouraging families, protecting the vulnerable, and spreading the message of love, faith, and resilience. Through his survival and acts of kindness, even his enemies begin to witness the power of God, and hope begins to take root in hearts that had long been consumed by fear. Moral lesson: faith, courage, and love can overcome even the darkest challenges. True strength comes not from violence or hatred, but from trusting in God, helping others, and choosing hope over fear. Miracles often manifest not just to save a life, but to inspire others to act with courage and compassion. The end.